Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Hello everyone and welcome to the show. My name is Rook LaChica and today I'm talking with teen therapy expert and mom herself, Melissa Mose, LMFT. And we're going to be talking about the most common myths and misconceptions around getting help for teens with OCD and how these beliefs stop many moms from acting in the best interest of their kids. Now, Melissa is a well-known expert on the subject of parenting teens, and specifically teens with OCD, and she's very graciously agreed to this 3-part interview series to share some of her extensive knowledge and experience. Now, today's interview is part 1 of that 3-part series, and it's titled Myths and Misconceptions About Getting Help for Teens with OCD. And our goal today is to dispel the most common myths and misconceptions in this area so that every mom listening can learn 3 specific ways to help their teenager succeed in overcoming OCD. So, Melissa Mose, thank you again for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So now, before we dig into the meat of our interview today, can you start off by explaining to everyone, what does the LMFT after your name stand for?
It stands for Licensed Marriage and Family Counselor. So it basically means that I'm a therapist, and I primarily work with families, and it works specifically for teenagers in my particular case.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So to get started, my first set of questions is going to be about your background and your experience in the field of getting help for teens with OCD, so that moms in our audience can understand that, who you are, where you're coming from, and how and why it is that you can relate to where they are now. Then we'll jump into the main areas where people have misunderstandings and misconceptions, okay?
Sounds good.
Okay, great. So let's get started right off the bat. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself in terms of your background and your education and experience in working with teens and children and teens with OCD in particular? When did you get started with all this?
Well, I after college, I thought I was going to be an English professor, but I discovered that I was interested in psychology. So I went straight into graduate school and found myself as a family therapy intern in my early 20s. And so I was young, and teenagers just seemed like the logical choice. I really loved their energy, and so this was over 20 years ago. And that was really the beginning. I started working with teens on all topics. Every kind of concern that you could come up with that a teenager might have. In the very beginning, that's what I worked with.
Okay. So now you've already explained the LMFT, but have you had any additional training or education in treating teens with OCD specifically? Or, has this just been kind of like on-the-job training?
Well, it's both. But I specifically, when I decided to work with OCD, because it is really actually different than many other kinds of disorders, I did go do a specific training. I went. It was very intensive, and there was a lot of follow-up supervision. And so since that time, I've done an advanced training, and I go to all of the conferences because, OCD requires specific training. Once I did that, I realized I needed to practice on the job. And so I decided to work for a specific counseling center that did OCD only. So it was OCDLA, and I worked for them for a year, specifically because I wanted to get training in working with people with OCD. And because you really can't just learn about it. You have to do it.
Yeah, I would imagine that, there's the difference between book learning and then actually being in there and dealing with the patients themselves
right.
is going to be different.
Yeah, very different. So I did both.
Okay. All right. Great. Now, my understanding also in preparing for the interview is that you actually have a daughter with OCD?
I do, and that was the inspiration for all of this. And I have a daughter who had a very sudden onset OCD when she was quite little, and I found at that point in time that even though I'd been a licensed marriage and family therapist for about, almost 15 years at that point, as a mental health professional, I had no idea how to help my kid. And I did all the research, and I found there were very few treatment centers out there. And so what I did was throw myself into learning all about the disorder in order to help her. And went along with, got her treatment at UCLA and went through, basically that was the best training I ever had, was to watch her get better and learn from experience what those experts did. And when I saw how quickly she got better, I became very inspired. And I realized that this works.
That's awesome.
I know with therapy you have sort of there's an idea, and it's true, that people can come and talk for years about their troubles.
Mm-hmm.
And, and it's true. You can get with a teenager and be sitting there talking about boys and social concerns for years, and nothing really changes. But with this kind of treatment, it works, and people get better, and that's what threw me into really learning more about it.
That is great to hear. And I'm honestly, just from my own personal opinion, I always feel like if I'm going to go to someone for help, I really would rather go to someone who has that personal, intimate experience of having to deal with it from the same perspective that I have. So in my opinion, as a parent, if I had a teen who had OCD, I would really love to talk to a therapist who's not only book learning and who has, had the sessions to be able to work with them, but is actually living it a day to day and can really, I think, have a deeper understanding of exactly what we're going through.
That's really, really true. I think that's why I share my experience, and a lot of therapists don't. The stereotypical blank slate thing. I do share my experience. I put it on my website and with my daughter's permission. I definitely check in with her from time to time on, is this okay with you? And she's happy about it. But I do share my experience because it's very different for parents with kids with OCD. And I found that my intuitive parenting skills were the exact opposite. And I'm sure we'll get into more of this later. But yeah, I agree with you. I think it's important to the way I work is different because I've actually lived it.
I would totally agree. Well, look, it's obvious that you're the right expert for us when it comes to getting help for teens with OCD. So let's go ahead and dive into those myths and misconceptions and get them cleared up for people. So what is the number one myth or misconception that you think parents have about getting help for their teenager with OCD?
Well, I think the number one myth that I hear in general about OCD and also from parents is that we're all a little OCD. It's something that they could just try a little harder and they could change. It's behavioral. It's something that we all have that's something that can be changed by willpower and trying harder. That is the one that frustrates the kids with OCDs. Adults with OCD is when they hear people say, "Oh, but aren't we all a little OCD?" Or "I'm so OCD about that." It's that's a tough one.
Gotcha. So how do you believe that that's hurting them?
I think it hurts. Well, it hurts the individual who's suffering with OCD because they feel very misunderstood. I think it hurts parents in their attempts to help their children because if you think that your child is misbehaving or being stubborn or just trying to get their way, you behave very differently as a parent than you would if you realize that there's a neurological brain-based disorder that's happening right now, and they don't want to be doing this any more than you want them to be doing it. I remember somebody saying to me when my daughter was going through this, and she had issues with food, and she wouldn't eat in a restaurant. And the other parent said, "Well, she sure learned how to get her way, hasn't she?" And it was so disconcerting because really, truly, this was a situation where she hadn't eaten in days. And I set down a giant bowl of ice cream in front of her, and she couldn't eat it. It wasn't behavioral. She couldn't help it. So I think it really hurts the relationship between a parent and a child, and it keeps you from being able to actually help them address what it is that's really going on.
Okay. I'll be honest with you. I've probably used that phrase about being a little bit OCD because I do, especially like on my desk area and things like that. I like things in a very specific order, but, I'm not quite sure how, why is it false to believe that about what kinds of things should you be looking for to see whether or not it's just you're kind of tidy, like maybe I am, versus someone who actually has the signs of OCD.
Right. It's understandable too. I think I've done the same thing. And and one of the reasons speaks to the third myth that we'll get to, which is that there's much more to OCD than that tidying piece. But the real difference is that somebody with OCD is struggling with sometimes actually really debilitating anxiety that's driving the desire to have the desk neat. And so for us, I think if something's out of line, we don't like it and we may fix it, but we're not going to be thrown into a panic attack by it, or we're not going to be just debilitated by feeling. It's often a body-based just frustration, or it's so uncomfortable. It's about choice, really, that we can choose to deal with it and move on, whereas somebody with OCD has the feeling that they have to change it. It's not because I want to. It's not because washing my hands for the 32nd time really seems like a good idea. I have to.
Gotcha. Okay. So what do you think that parents should do now that they know the truth about this one?
I think it's communicating. If we're really talking about parenting a teenager who has OCD, or really, I mean, this applies to being a partner to somebody who has OCD as well. But to really communicate that I get that you're not doing this on purpose. I understand that this is not something that you want to be doing, and it feels really out of control. I think the communication piece is key. And then in terms of parenting, that you're not punishing the behavior. There's a lot of, if you can't get out the door to go to school on time, then, you're going to be grounded, or I'm going to take this away, or you lose your phone. There's that kind of discipline that you're not going to correct OCD by changing your discipline or by punishing.
Gotcha. Okay. So, and that would be one of the first tips that you would give parents then on if they're making this mistake currently, for them to kind of get back onto the right track would be to really kind of analyze this a little bit deeper and take that tip about the fact that you can't punish this behavior away.
Right.
Is that right?
I would say yes. To do some research, educate yourself, talk with your teen, open up the dialogue, and try and understand what the actual experience is of the person, of the teen who's suffering. Get curious. I think that would be the first real tip. Get curious instead of operating out of the fear of, I'm the parent here, what do I do? I'm supposed to know how to fix this. We get scared. So getting curious and asking questions would be a good first step.
Do you find that teens are able to express to you in a way that is clear enough for the parent to really know what's happening with them? Because I know with my own son, there were times he was very verbal, thankfully, and my wife and I could sit down with him and talk to him, and he was pretty good at expressing his feelings and what was coming across. But I also know the other little boys that I've had to deal with over the years, like his friends and things like that. If they would have outbursts or whatever, and we try to sit them down and just kind of chat with them. I did find that they had a little bit of a difficult time really expressing themselves. Do you have any tips as far as how the parents can, either interpret what they're saying, or maybe there's a different thing? Maybe they should, are there tips or signs to look for to maybe decide, oh, you know what, maybe I should have an evaluation done or something to figure out whether or not this really is OCD.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's the verbal communication and the nonverbal communication. Most teens, I think, are pretty open to abstract thinking and can at least, they're smart enough and they're quick learners, and they can pretty much describe that this is something that doesn't feel like something they want. We call it ego syntonic versus ego dystonic. It doesn't feel like it's me. It feels like I'm out of control.
Okay.
And so that conversation about it's a really good question because they can articulate it to a point, but sometimes there is that misinterpretation. I know I've worked with families where the kid's refusing to clean their room, and it sounds really just defiant to say, well, I can't clean it because once I get started, I won't be able to stop. Well, yeah, a likely story. So you have to keep it right. So how do you know? I mean, I think you're asking a really good question. And what I look at is the level of distress, and usually also that it happens in more than one area. Okay. So it's not just the room, but if it's somebody who can't stop, I can't start cleaning because I won't be able to stop. I have to wait until I have the whole day. They usually can't stop eating until they've finished everything on their plate, and they can't stop writing an answer to a short question on a history test until they've told the whole story. So you usually see it in more than one place, and the underlying thing is I can't help it.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Well, let's move on. So what is the second biggest myth or misconception that you see that parents may have about, getting help for their teens with OCDs?
Well, this is the flip side. The first myth is that they can change it if they just try hard. The second myth is that they can't help it and they can't change, and we need to accommodate them and adjust in order to make sure they don't experience too much anxiety. So the second myth is that they can't really change and they can't really get better. And that happens more behaviorally than I think that people say, oh, well, they'll never get better. There is a hopeless quality about OCD, and you hear that it's not curable. But that doesn't mean we can't make progress.
Gotcha. Okay. So with this one, what would you say is holding people back as far as this belief that they can't change? It sounded like you mentioned one, which is we're just going to change everything around them basically to accommodate them. Exactly.
What you find is that whole families change their routines. They change their expectations around the house. The kid with OCD doesn't have to do the chores, or the whole family will not go to a certain town or not drive by a certain building. They'll take the long way around because they know that the teen or the kid with OCD is going to flip out. Wow. And a lot of it happens unconsciously. You just know, oh gosh, if I do that, they're really going to flip, and you stop doing it. So the way that it holds parents back is what we call accommodation. Parents begin to accommodate the symptoms and make adjustments in order to kind of calm things down.
Gotcha. Okay. So what's the reality here? What should they understand?
Well, the reality is that every time somebody engages in a compulsion, and I'll stop and sort of explain what I mean by that, but every time somebody engages in a compulsion in order to relieve the anxiety of an obsessive thought, they make their OCD worse. So when you allow the OCD to run, it's not just that it doesn't get better, it's that it gets worse.
Because they're kind of reinforcing a behavior then.
It's like the marble goes deeper and deeper in the groove.
Gotcha.
And,
okay.
So a compulsion is something that you do or say or think or in order to neutralize an obsessive thought or feeling. So something's really uncomfortable, and I learn. It's a learning mechanism. I learned that if I just tap 3 times, it goes away. And maybe it was a coincidence that it happened the first time, but it worked, and so I do it. Or I wash my hands and I feel better. It doesn't matter that they're cracked and bleeding. I know it'll fix it because I've learned that. And so, like you learn an instrument or a sport, the repetition drives it. And so the actual reality that parents need to understand is that even though you don't want to punish somebody because you think they're being stubborn, you also don't want to give them everything they want in order to make their life easy. You don't want to accommodate because then you're reinforcing the OCD. It's a real balancing act.
Okay.
And you're often teasing apart, what is behavioral, because of course they are still teenagers, and what is OCD, and that's the balance that needs to be found. That's that middle road.
Okay, so well, now that you've laid out that truth, then what actions should the parents be taking?
Once it's clear what the OCD compulsions are, what usually happens in treatment, and there are plenty of workbooks out there that people can try, but what usually happens is that you get a sense of, on a scale of 1 to 10, how difficult is a certain compulsion to resist. Like, if you have to take your socks off 3 or 4 times before you can be comfortable with the way they are, what if you don't do that? Does that make you crazy at a 10, or does that make you crazy at a 4? Just to get a sense from, it really is a collaborative effort with the teenager. Like, how hard is it going to be for you to resist this compulsion? And then what parents need to do is stop accommodating. So it's a matter of really regulating your own anxiety, of being afraid that you're going to have a temper tantrum to deal with if you don't do what the kid wants you to do. But you have to stop accommodating gradually with the easier things first and working up the scale. So with somebody who, for instance, asks a question 20 times, it's, okay, I'm going to answer this once and one time only. And when they ask it again, what did I say the last time you asked? Instead of, going over it again. Because there are kids who, it'll go throughout a day. They may ask the same question hundreds of times. Mm-hmm. So stop the accommodation, and that's something the whole family has to learn to do.
Okay. So if a parent's already kind of been derailed from this in the assumption that they can't, that, the child's not going to be able to change, the best way for them to get back on track, and one of the, I guess maybe it sounded gentler ways to get back on track, is to do exactly what you just recommended there, where you set some boundaries that are workable, and then you gradually make those boundaries, extend them a little bit and maybe harden them a little bit. Does that sound about right?
That sounds exactly right. And with a teenager, they really want to feel a part of things and in control. And I think it's important to explain. I've been handling it this way. I've been, opening all the doors for you, and I've been adjusting our schedule so that we can get to. I've been doing all these things, and what I realized now is that I've been wrong, and it isn't helping you. And so I want you to know I'm going to start changing these things, and it's not because you're bad or I'm angry or I don't love you. It's because this is the only way you're going to get better. I think it's really important, especially with teenagers, to have that conversation so they don't feel like you're pulling the rug out from under them.
Gotcha. No, that makes total sense. Okay. Well, let's move on. So what is the third biggest myth or misconception that parents have about getting help for their teens with OCD?
I think that the biggest one is that it's all about hand washing and cleaning. It's washing and checking is what OCD is. So what, there are many, obsessions can settle on pretty much anything. Washing and checking are the ones that we see out, in the world and movies, and we know about those. But not everybody who washes their hands has OCD, and so there's that piece of it. But the real myth is that it's just washing and checking.
Okay. So how does that hurt the parents and or the teens when parents are under this misconception?
I think it actually delays diagnosis, and it keeps people from getting help or the right kind of help. It's tough to recognize, and what I realized really when I started training intensively and working with OCD is that even as a therapist, there were things, cases, and people that I've seen in the past that had OCD, and I didn't recognize it because I didn't realize, it could be a worry about having a blasphemous thought, or one girl who was worried that she was going to hurt her mom, or suicidal obsessions. Many therapists don't recognize obsessive thinking about certain topics as OCD because it's not manifesting as a ritual. Really, there are 4 kinds of compulsions. One kind is the ritualistic behavior that we recognize, redoing things or counting things or checking the locks or washing your hands. That's the rituals. Another kind is avoidance. So people begin to avoid situations that trigger anxiety. Reassurance seeking is another way that it's another kind of compulsion. So, is this okay? Are you sure it's okay? How do you know it's okay?
Okay.
Am I sick? Am I going to be sick if I eat this? Am I going to, that kind of reassurance seeking. And then the 4th one is mental rituals. And those are just happening in somebody's head that you might not even recognize. But if you're more attuned to that, and if we educate the public more on the fact that OCD and obsessions can focus on any particular type of content, then I think we're going to diagnose it sooner and people will be able to get help at a younger age.
Yeah, geez, I can't even imagine trying to figure out whether or not there's a mental rituals that are going on. Do they just kind of seem like they're zoning out, or I don't know. That seems like it would be a really tough one to figure out on your own. That's for sure.
It is tough, and I think that a lot of these kids are initially targeted as having ADHD because they are inattentive.
Okay.
And the reason, but when you start getting into why aren't they paying attention, it's not the same as if they did have ADHD. With OCD, they may be saying a certain phrase in their head over and over and over to make sure something bad doesn't happen, or saying something backwards, undoing something in their head, or like they have so many different thoughts happening in their mind at the same time that they just can't concentrate. So yes, sometimes you recognize it as like where what are you doing? What are you thinking? You're obviously not here right now. But oftentimes it's that it gets diagnosed and somebody maybe goes into treatment for a different reason.
Gotcha. Okay, so I just wanted to recap that real quick. So there are 4 different ways that it can manifest. And so the first one is rituals, which are those external ones that we all kind of think about when we think about OCD. The second is avoidance, to just kind of get away from whatever might be causing the anxiety or the obsessive thoughts, correct?
Right.
Okay. Third is reassurance seeking. So they're just constantly looking for that reassurance or making sure that whatever it is. So with someone like that, is it pretty much everything that they do and or about to attempt that they seek that kind of reassurance?
It's funny. It isn't.
Of course not. That would be too easy.
Yeah, it really, sometimes it really throws you off because, for instance, I've had many parents come in here and think, I didn't think it was OCD because their room's a mess, but they have to have this in order. So the same is true with the reassurance seeking. Like they may not care what anybody thinks about how they dress, and they may not care what grades they get, but they may really care, like, is there any fat in this, or am I going to get germs, or am I going to get sick, or sometimes it's really really out there, like is there going to be an earthquake? Is there going to be a tsunami? Or am I going to throw up? My stomach hurts. How do you know I'm going to? What if I do throw up?
Wow.
So it's a full range from things that are reasonable questions that we all have, like, ooh, I just sat and ate food. Am I going to get sick? Well, we can sort of have that thought and let it go. Somebody who has OCD, that thought goes over and over and over and over and over.
Okay. And then the fourth one is the mental rituals, where they're just kind of stuck in their own head with whatever those particular thoughts are for them, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. So what can parents do to kind of get back onto the right track with this one? I mean, if they're not, are there particular, the routines obviously and obsessions, the external ones are easy, but do you have any tips for the other three? I mean, we've kind of talked about it a little bit, but it seems like those would be really, really difficult to spot.
Yeah, I think that they really are. A couple of things. I think one, just raising awareness, and for parents to know to look out for things like this. And sometimes, there's just different ways to spot it. Sometimes school difficulties is how it shows up first, but and just doing some research, getting educated. There is so much information online. Even just starting at the International OCD Foundation website, but there are also all kinds of blogs of people just describing what it feels like. And
that's right. Didn't you tell me when we were prepping for this that there is a young girl on YouTube who talks about having OCD, and she describes what it's like?
Yeah, it's amazing. I remember telling you about that one, and I can't remember what it is. But once you start looking, there's actually a Yahoo group for teens out there. There are all kinds of parenting online support groups. But even to just start with going to the international, the IOCDF website is the gold standard out there, and just reading the descriptions. I mean, getting familiar with. There's such a thing as gay OCD. People are, what if I'm gay? How do I know? And then the mental checking goes on. Nobody realizes that's OCD. I mean, it's so obscure. But if you see behavior that doesn't seem, it's a little confusing, if there are sort of blank periods of time where you can't account for what your kid was doing, like they were just in the bathroom for an hour, why? Those kinds of things, to start to just do some research, I think, is really the first step to getting on track, and to contact a professional that is trained in recognizing and diagnosing.
Okay. And if I'm not mistaken, there is actually a resource page on your website at melissamosement.com /resources. And the links to all of those sites that you just mentioned are actually right there on your website, correct?
Yes, they are.
Okay, perfect. So people can just go to www.melissamosment.com /resources, and all of those links that she just mentioned are available directly from there. Now, is there anything that you would say that used to be true in the world of getting help for teens with OCD, but maybe now there's been new information or new discoveries that kind of make those old things, kind of false, basically, at this point?
I think that the research, there's been so much recent research that the old assumptions are being overturned. There are all kinds of those things, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
There's a lot of understanding now about how it's a learning-based disorder, and that behavioral treatment is really what works. I think people used to think it's about understanding what happened in your childhood, and what traumas did you have, or a more psychodynamic approach. What is underlying your fear of germs? That used to be an approach to OCD that we now know really isn't that useful for the most part.
Okay.
So the types of treatment, I think that's the biggest place where the current research has changed the entire field.
Okay, gotcha. All right. So what would you say would be the right mindset for a mom of a teenager who has OCD or they suspect has OCD that would almost like guarantee their success as far as being able to help their teen moving forward?
Well, it's guarantee is a strong word.
Well, that's true.
But I guess
we'll give them
really,
the greatest chance at success.
We are human beings.
That's true.
But really, to guarantee moving forward is an attitude that this can be managed, and people with OCD can have very healthy, happy lives, and can really manage it in a way that is productive. And I guess one old belief that we don't have anymore is, that either it's like the mythology that it's not severe, or that it is so severe you can't get over it. So the mindset is we can work through this, and then that it's a balancing act. It's not black and white. That we have to not accommodate. We have to adjust our expectations without adjusting our expectations. It really is walking a tightrope as a parent of a child with OCD. I have to constantly be saying, it's not necessarily intuitive. I want to protect my kid, and I think if there's one piece, especially for us moms of kids who have OCD, is we don't want our children to suffer. And rescuing them is the worst thing we can possibly do. Going in and reducing their anxiety is going to make it worse. So the mindset, I think, that is
Wait again. Say that again. Reducing their anxiety will actually make things worse.
Yes. That's the counterintuitive.
Wow, that is very counterintuitive.
Yes, because that's what a compulsion does. A compulsion reduces anxiety, and it works. But the problem is then it becomes an entrenched behavior that interferes with your life. And so what the key is that we need to learn to tolerate anxiety and to recognize that the anxiety will go away on its own eventually. It will fade. We don't have to do something to fix it. So as a mom, we want to fix it. We want to make them feel better. Mm-hmm. And so, we'll try 3 different meals until one feels right, or we'll open all the doors for them so they don't have to do it, or we'll do whatever we think might make them feel better. But in order to get through OCD, the idea that, like jumping in a cold pool, eventually you get used to it if you mm-hmm. stay in there, mm-hmm. or walking into a dark room, if you stay there, your eyes adjust, or walking into a room that smells funny, eventually you don't notice it, mm-hmm. that our nervous systems will adapt. And I guess for moms to be able to regulate their own anxiety and calm themselves so that they don't jump in and fix it for their kids is I guess, really going to guarantee. That's a guarantee. If that will help. Will it make it go away completely? Who knows? But that's the mindset I think that moms need to really work on adopting when they have a child or a teen with OCD.
Okay. That's great stuff. That's really, and I think one of the tougher things is the fact that your natural instincts as a parent mm-hmm. are so wrong in helping with this. I find that so.
Well, I will tell you, I made it worse for my daughter.
Points.
Yeah, I made it worse for my daughter, and I'm a trained mental health professional. And when she came on with all of this, I made it worse for a while until I found the right treatment.
Wow, mm-hmm. That's amazing.
Yeah.
All right, so we're about to wrap up here. Is there anything else that I haven't asked you about that you'd like to share at this point, or if nothing else, I mean, where do you see the silver lining as far as teens with OCD and the moms that are out there who are, trying to help their children cope with this?
Well, it's a really good question, and I like that we're ending on that because, first of all, it's not that rare. 1 in 200 kids actually have OCD. And so taking a little bit of the stigma out of it is important. But what I came to with my daughter in terms of trying to really accept that this was what was going on is that the silver lining is that she is going to learn skills by battling OCD, skills like how to tolerate anxiety without acting out to fix it all the time, skills like talking herself down into a calm place, skills that most adults never learn. And so really, the way that you work through OCD by trying to just accept that a feeling state is a feeling and it's not going to kill you. You don't have to do anything to get better. The road rage isn't going to help. That when you have a kid or a teen with OCD, the silver lining is they're learning life skills that will make them better human beings for the rest of their lives.
That is a great way to wrap this up. I love that because you nailed it on the head as far as the skills that these teens will have to learn in order to cope with this are skills that I've noticed, at least in my dealings, that a lot of grown-ups don't have. And wow, that is, I like the way that's a really good, really positive outlook on that one. That's awesome.
Right, and I guess, one step further is for us as parents, we're learning too.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, thank you so much, Melissa, for an absolutely tremendous interview. I'm sure all the moms of teens in our audience have a much clearer understanding of the realities of getting help for kids with teens with OCD now that you've cleared up all of these myths and misconceptions.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Thank you to everyone in our audience for joining us today for this amazing presentation. Again, I'm Rook LaChica, and thanks for joining us. I'd like to invite you to check out www.melissamoseft.com/resources today for more information on how you can succeed with getting help for your teens with OCD and providing them with the right support that they need to overcome OCD so that they can enjoy the happy and healthy lives we all want for our kids. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.